The champagne glass caught the light, glittering like a promise. My wedding reception pulsed with music, laughter, and the smell of roses that my mother had insisted on lining the hall with. But in the middle of all that joy I saw it, her hand deliberate and sly, dropping something into my glass. My mother-in-law. Her pearl bracelet jingled softly, the sound swallowed by the band's trumpet, but my eyes didn't miss a thing. My stomach turned cold. In one heartbeat my trust in that woman cracked apart like glass shattering on marble. I smiled anyway. A bride must always smile. When no one was looking, I reached out and with the calmness of a surgeon, switched my glass with hers. The toast was announced, the clinking began, and she raised her glass high, unaware she was about to taste her own poison. 30 minutes later I saw it begin. Her face drained of color. Her laughter faltered, her hand trembled. She tried to grip the table for balance but collapsed against the chair as if gravity had finally claimed her. Gasps filled the room. Guests rushed in. I just stood there, clutching my bouquet, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My name is Emily Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because what happened that night was only the beginning. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? Have you ever realized that the people who smile at you are the same ones sharpening the knife behind your back? That was my wedding day. The day I became someone's daughter-in-law. The day I became someone's target. As paramedics rushed in, as whispers spread like wildfire through the reception hall, I stood frozen, not with fear but with clarity. She had wanted me gone before the ink on my marriage certificate had even dried. But I wasn't gone. She was. The guests' faces blurred around me, 1,000 voices overlapping. My husband's voice cut through it. Mom? Mom. Raw with panic. He dropped to his knees beside her, clutching her hand, eyes darting back and forth, searching for answers. And there I was, the bride in white, standing with the glass in my hand. The glass she meant for me. No one suspected. Not then. Not yet. But betrayal is a seed, and once planted it grows wild. That night was not her ending, it was mine. My ending as the naive girl who thought marriage was about love and family. That night I began my rebirth. And as the champagne bubbles fizzled in the abandoned glass, I realized something I would never forget. Every toast has a price. And someone always pays. The sirens faded into the night, but the echoes of chaos clung to the walls of the reception hall. My husband, Daniel, had disappeared into the ambulance with his mother, his tuxedo jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. The guests lingered, whispering in clusters, their eyes darting between me and the champagne glasses. I stood under the chandelier, alone in my own wedding dress, the lace suddenly feeling like a costume I hadn't chosen. She just collapsed, one aunt whispered to another. They said her drink. No, it must have been her heart. Their words buzzed in my ears like flies. Nobody asked me what I saw. Nobody knew I had been seconds away from drinking the very poison that was meant to take me out. When Daniel returned hours later, his face was pale, his hands trembling. She's stable, he said, his voice raw. They're running test. They think it was something in her drink. I nodded, my heart thundering. My lips parted, wanting to tell him everything, to scream that I saw her do it, that I knew. But when his eyes met mine, filled with a storm I couldn't name, I froze. How could I tell him his own mother tried to kill me? Instead, I swallowed the truth like a stone. That's terrifying, I whispered. He pulled me into his arms, but his touch felt different. Urgent, desperate, not the embrace of a husband on his wedding night but of a man clinging to something before it slipped away. The hotel suite was quiet later, except for the hum of the city outside. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my gown, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. My mascara had smudged into shadows under my eyes. I looked like a ghost. Daniel came out of the bathroom, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie discarded. They don't know what it was yet, he muttered. But they'll find out. They always find out. His tone was sharp, clipped, and for the first time I felt the knife edge of suspicion slicing the air between us. I turned slowly toward him. Daniel, you don't think. I don't know what to think, he snapped, then pressed his palms to his face. God, Emily, my mother almost died tonight. And his voice cracked. I can't shake the image of her glass in your hand. The room tilted. My breath caught in my throat. He'd noticed. You think it was me? My voice was barely a whisper. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The distance between us said it all. The betrayal had started with his mother. But now I could feel it spreading, creeping into my marriage like poison in a vein. I lay down that night in the wedding bed beside my new husband, but it didn't feel like love. It felt like war. And wars have casualties. By morning, the headlines had already begun. Prominent businesswoman collapses at son's wedding, possible poisoning. Her name, Margaret Hayes, was splashed across the news sites. The words possible poisoning pulsed on my phone screen like a heartbeat. I sat in the hotel suite alone, still in pieces of my gown, veil crumpled on the floor. Daniel hadn't come back after leaving at dawn to see her. He hadn't texted. Not even once. When the door finally opened, he walked in without meeting my eyes. His tie was straightened, his jaw freshly shaven as if he'd reset himself overnight. But there was a sharpness in him now, something new. She's awake, he said flatly. Relief flickered across my chest. Thank God. She said it wasn't an accident. His eyes snapped to mine. She said she saw you. The room tilted again. My throat dried. What? She said you switched glasses. That she noticed. She said she tried to warn me about you before, but I wouldn't listen. His voice cracked, torn between rage and confusion. Emily, why would she say that? I wanted to scream. To claw at the walls. To rip the lies apart. But all I could do was stare at him, shaking. Daniel, she put something in my glass. I saw her. That's why I switched. It was her. He stepped closer, his face twisted with disbelief. You're telling me my mother tried to poison you? On our wedding night? Yes. My voice splintered, raw with desperation. She hates me, Daniel. You know she always has. You've felt it too, haven't you? But he looked at me like I was a stranger. I don't know what to believe, he whispered, and the way his voice cracked broke something inside me. Because deep down I knew the truth. It didn't matter what I said. Margaret had gotten to him first. And in this war the first story told was the one that stuck. The days that followed blurred. Detectives came, asked questions, took statements. They searched the champagne bottles, the glasses, the catering staff. They pulled me aside in a quiet room, their voices calm but firm. Mrs. Carter, one said, flipping through his notes. Multiple guests confirmed you had your mother-in-law's glass when she collapsed. Can you explain that? My hands shook in my lap. She switched it herself. I didn't. His eyes flickered with doubt. The pen scratched on his notepad. When I walked out of that room, I saw Margaret sitting upright in her hospital bed, eyes sharp, lips curled into the faintest smile. The tubes and wires didn't weaken her. They crowned her. And when her gaze locked on mine, I knew it. She wasn't just trying to destroy me. She was winning. That night, Daniel didn't come home again. The bed was cold beside me. My wedding ring felt heavier than iron. And for the first time since I saw her hand over my glass, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't enough for her to hurt me. She wanted to erase me. The knock at the door came just after midnight. Relentless. When I opened it, 2 detectives stood in the hall. Their suits were wrinkled, their eyes heavy, but their tone was all business. Mrs. Carter, one said, we need you to come with us for further questioning. Daniel wasn't there. He hadn't been for 2 days. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me, my fingers trembling. Can't this wait until morning? The detective shook his head. No, ma'am. It can't. At the station, the room was cold, the light above me buzzing faintly. They set a recorder on the table, clicked it on, and their voices became sharper, less patient. Why did you switch glasses with your mother-in-law? Did you and Margaret Hayes have disagreements before the wedding? Is it true she opposed the marriage? Their questions piled on, every one cutting closer to the bone. I tried to tell them the truth, that I saw her hand, that she slipped something in. But each time the detectives traded a look, that same flicker of disbelief. I could feel the story solidifying against me, wet cement hardening into a prison wall. Then the second detective leaned in, his voice lower. Mrs. Carter, do you understand the seriousness of what we're investigating? If it's proven that substance was intentionally placed, this isn't just an accident. This is attempted murder. The word lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. Murder. Not hers. I walked out of that room hollow. My lawyer, hastily appointed, barely invested, murmured about cooperating, about keeping my answers short. But his eyes told me everything. He didn't believe me either. When I got back to the suite, Daniel was finally there. His back was to me, shoulders tense, staring out the window at the city lights. He didn't turn when I walked in. They questioned me too, he said flatly. They asked if we fought. If I ever thought you might hurt someone. The words stung. And what did you say? He finally turned, his face unreadable. I told them I don't know you well enough to answer. The air left my lungs. We're married, Daniel. Yeah, he said bitterly. And yet it feels like I married a stranger. I wanted to reach for him, to scream that this wasn't fair, that his mother had orchestrated all of it. But then his phone buzzed and I saw her name light up the screen. He answered immediately, voice softening, gentling in ways it hadn't for me in days. Hi, Mom. Yeah, I'm here. Don't worry. He turned his back to me as he spoke, like I was already erased. That was the moment I understood. She wasn't just poisoning my drink. She was poisoning my marriage. And Daniel was drinking it willingly. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe beside me. My wedding ring felt like a shackle. My life, my freedom, was hanging by a thread, and Margaret Hayes was holding the scissors. But she had forgotten one thing. I wasn't the naive bride anymore. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. And women like that, we don't break. We burn. I stopped crying the morning the papers came. They slid under the hotel door with a soft thud, and when I picked one up, my own face stared back at me. A photograph from the reception. Me in my wedding dress, holding the champagne glass. The headline screamed, Bride or Black Widow? Investigation deepens into wedding night poisoning. The words coiled around me like chains. My name wasn't Emily Carter anymore. It was suspect, scandal, disgrace. Daniel barely looked up when I dropped the paper onto the bed. He was on the phone again, voice low, words clipped, pacing the room like a man already gone. I didn't have to ask who he was speaking to. His mother's voice was everywhere. In the detective's questions. In the whispers of relatives. In the silence between us. And I realized, if I stayed quiet, if I let her story be the only story told, I would drown in it. So I stopped drowning. I started digging. That day, while Daniel was gone, I went to the reception hall. The staff were tired of questions from police, but a sympathetic waitress, barely 19, eyes wide and nervous, slipped me a whisper. I saw her, she said. Your mother-in-law. She was leaning over your glass. But the detectives, they didn't want to write it down. My pulse raced. Proof. A seed of truth. Will you tell them? Will you put it in writing? I asked. But she shook her head, biting her lip. I can't. He's powerful. Everyone knows who she is. I could lose my job. My family needs me to keep it. Fear. Margaret had wrapped the whole world in it like a spider's web. Still I pressed. Then tell me what you saw. Every detail. Her voice trembled as she described it. Margaret's hand, the movement, the way she looked around before dropping something into the champagne. I recorded it on my phone. Not perfect, not official, but a weapon. A sliver of light in all the darkness. When I left, the air outside tasted different. Sharper. Like survival. That night, Daniel came back, his face hardened. He sat on the edge of the bed without looking at me. They found residue in the glass, he said. It was a sedative. Strong. Enough to make someone collapse. My breath caught. So now they'll believe me? His jaw tightened. They think you meant to make her look weak. Embarrass her. Maybe worse. I laughed, bitter and sharp, a sound I barely recognized as my own. Of course. Because Margaret Hayes is untouchable. Even when she's caught with poison on her lips, the world still bows to her. Daniel stood, fists clenched. Don't talk about her like that. That was when I knew. He wasn't mine anymore. He was hers. But Margaret had made a mistake. She thought she'd stripped me of everything. My name. My husband. My freedom. But what she didn't realize was that she'd given me something far more dangerous. Clarity. And clarity is the beginning of revenge. The first thing you lose in a war like this isn't love. It's silence. I stopped tiptoeing around Daniel, stopped pretending that if I just kept still the storm would pass. Margaret had already rewritten the story. If I wanted to survive, I needed to write my own. I started with her medicine cabinet. While Daniel was at the hospital, I went to their family estate, the house Margaret had ruled like a queen. The staff knew me now, they smiled, nodded politely, let me in without question. To them I was still the bride. They didn't yet know I was the accused. Her bathroom smelled of roses and iron. Rows of bottles lined the shelves. Prescriptions, supplements, powders in amber jars. And there it was. A vial half empty, its label peeled, its contents matching the detective's words. Sedative. Potent. Dangerous. I took photos, slipped the bottle into my purse and left before the walls could whisper what I'd done. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. And I had one, Daniel. That night, I laid it all out on the bed. The waitress's recorded words, the photo of the vial, the truth in my trembling hands. Daniel, this is it. Proof. Your mother poisoned me. For a moment, his eyes flickered. Doubt cracked through the mask. Then he looked away. She said you'd do this, he whispered. That you'd twist everything. That you'd try to turn me against her. My blood went cold. Daniel, you'd rather believe her than me? He stood, pacing, running his hands through his hair. She's my mother. She raised me. He sacrificed everything for me. And you, his voice broke. You're asking me to believe she tried to kill you? On our wedding day? Yes, I said, steel in my voice now. Because she did. But his silence was louder than any denial. That night I slept on the couch, the distance between us a canyon I knew I could never cross again. And while Daniel slipped deeper into her shadow, I slipped deeper into resolve. The next morning I went to the police myself. I laid out the photos, the recording, the vial. Their faces stayed blank, professional, but their questions were sharper now. Why would your mother-in-law want to harm you? Why bring us evidence days later instead of immediately? Why does it all conveniently point back to her? Because she's smarter than you, I wanted to scream. Because she's already writing the ending while you're still on the first page. But I said nothing. When I left, I caught a glimpse of Margaret arriving at the station. Fur coat, diamonds, a smile soft enough to melt stone. Reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing, and she looked fragile, saintly, like a woman who had suffered. When she passed me, her lips barely moved. A whisper only I could hear. You'll never win. But here's the thing about women like me. When the world thinks we're broken, that's when we're most dangerous. And as her perfume lingered in the air like poison, I swore something to myself. I wasn't going to clear my name. I was going to bury hers. Revenge doesn't start with fire. It starts with patience. I let Margaret believe she'd won. I let her bask in the pity of relatives, the sympathy of the press, the devotion of her son. I even let her smile at me across the hospital room when Daniel wasn't looking, her eyes glittering with silent triumph. But all the while I was building something beneath the surface. First the waitress. She was scared, but fear is only fear until you show someone it can be turned into power. I visited her again. This time with a lawyer, a woman who specialized in cases where the truth was buried under money and influence. The waitress trembled, but with the lawyer beside her she agreed to testify. A sworn statement notarized. A paper trail Margaret couldn't burn. Second the vial. I had it tested privately. Lab results in my hand, stamped undeniable. The same sedative found in Margaret's blood matched the residue on the bottle from her cabinet. A neat little ribbon of truth she couldn't cut away. But evidence wasn't enough. Margaret had built her empire on whispers, and whispers could kill louder than facts. So I started whispering back. I spoke to Daniel's cousins, the ones she'd alienated years ago with her cold cruelty. I reminded them of the time she cut them out of the family business, the inheritance battles, the lawsuits. Slowly I peeled away her halo. And then I lit the match. The night of her return home from the hospital, the family estate was full. Cameras. Guests. A celebration of her miraculous recovery. She entered the room like royalty, draped in silk, her hand clutching Daniel's arm. I was there too, smiling, waiting. When the champagne was poured, she raised her glass high. To family, she said, her voice rich and warm. To loyalty. And that was when I stepped forward. Funny, I said softly, letting the words slice through the room, that loyalty wasn't what you offered me. The crowd fell silent. Margaret's smile froze. Daniel's grip on her arm tightened. I pulled a small envelope from my purse and laid it on the table. Lab results. Witness statements. Proof. Proof that you tried to poison me on my wedding night. Gasps. Murmurs. Heads turned. Daniel's face went pale. Emily. But I wasn't finished. I turned to Margaret, my voice low, venom-laced with calm. You wanted me gone. You wanted me erased. But the only person disappearing tonight is you. She laughed then, brittle and sharp, trying to drown me out. Lies. Desperation from a woman who knows her marriage is failing. But her voice cracked. And the room heard it. Because lies may build empires, but truth delivered at the right moment, can burn them to ash. The whispers began. Cousins leaning close, uncles shaking their heads, aunts clutching their pearls. Margaret's face, usually so composed, began to tremble. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes. And I knew, this war was almost over. The Queen had finally begun to fall. The silence in that room was heavier than any verdict. Margaret's hand trembled around her glass, the crystal knocking softly against the table. For years she had ruled this family with fear and manipulation, her smile a mask, her voice a weapon. But now every mask was cracking. Every whisper was turning against her. Daniel stared at the papers spread before him. Lab results, sworn testimony, undeniable proof. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, the foundation of his world crumbling beneath him. Mom. His voice broke, a single word, but it cut deeper than 1,000 accusations. Margaret reached for him, her tone dripping with desperation. Daniel, don't you see? She's lying. She's always been lying. She only wants to destroy us. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The woman who had walked into that room like royalty now sounded like a beggar. And for the first time, Daniel didn't take her hand. The cousins stepped forward, their voices sharp. We always knew you were dangerous, Margaret. You've ruined enough lives. You finally went too far. She looked around, searching for an ally, but the walls that once echoed with her power now swallowed her whole. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You tried to erase me, I said softly. But all you've done is erase yourself. The cameras that had come to celebrate her miraculous recovery now captured her downfall. The story she thought she'd written was gone, replaced with the truth, broadcast, recorded, undeniable. The next morning, the papers carried a different headline. Margaret Hayes under investigation for poisoning bride at son's wedding. Daniel came to me then, eyes hollow, hands trembling. Emily, I didn't believe you. I let her. His voice collapsed under the weight of guilt. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at him. This man I had loved, this man who had doubted me, and I realized forgiveness wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't revenge anymore either. It was freedom. I slipped the wedding ring off my finger and laid it gently in his palm. This marriage was poisoned from the start, I whispered. But I refused to drink from it any longer. His tears fell. Mine didn't. As I walked away, the cameras still swarming the Hayes estate, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The world could call me whatever it wanted. Suspect, widow, stranger. But I knew who I was. I was the woman who survived. The woman who fought back. The woman who burned her chains to ash. And as the autumn wind carried the last echoes of Margaret's empire collapsing, I let the words settle in my chest like a final vow.